In this video, I'll show you PAR levels throughout my Biocube 29, which is operating with 2 AI blade coral grow. We'll vary up the intensity and also show you what PAR levels are like with only a single AI blade. This is one of several videos where I test lighting systems in my Biocubes. Be sure to subscribe to be informed when those are posted. Here's the PAR meter we'll be using. It's on loan from the Washington Area Marine Aquarists Society, or WAMUS. The PAR meter is an MQ510 by Apogee. Here's what it looks like in the front. And here's the sensor, which is inserted into the tank to collect PAR readings. There was an issue where the third digit on the device wouldn't show the complete number. However, this didn't affect our readings. This video shows 4 different PAR meter readings using light conditions shown here. I repeat all of these tests with a single AI blade if you want to fast forward to 8 minutes and 26 seconds. The next 4 tests use AI blades positioned like this. This is on a Biocube that is 21.8 inches wide. Our first test is for both lights operating at 70% intensity on all channels. This is similar to the configuration in my SPS tank. This is the Aquatic Illumination app, which allows you to customize each of 3 channels, blue, royal, and white. And as you see, we set them to 70% for this test. I'll be taking measurements 3 inches from the water, 1/3 down, halfway down, 3/4 down, and as close as I can get to the sand bed. You can see the actual PAR readings on this video. I'll read off some highlights and put some of the peak values on the screen. We encountered some surprisingly high readings, with the highest values over 600 PAR. In most cases, though, at the center of the tank, at about 1/3 of the way down, the PAR meter was registering about 450 PAR. As you move to the side, there were PAR readings between 100 and 160. Moving halfway down the tank, we find a center recording of 280 PAR. Moving to the sides, closer to 105 to 110. These are some really high readings. I have noticed a few places on my coral where it had bleached a little bit, and I had a couple of new frags that died. Makes me wonder if I was putting too much power onto them. As we drop a little further into the tank, closer to where my clam is located, or about 2/3 of the way down, we find a PAR value of 200. Close to the sand bed, we find values around 85. Overall, these are very high values, some of them high enough to damage corals. I was also impressed with how well the light penetrated the tank, achieving PAR values high enough to maintain SPS and a clam really all the way down to the sand bed. It will be interesting to see how this varies as we try out other lighting configurations in the tank. Our next test is for 2 AI blades operating at 100% on all 3 channels. Given our last test, I'm assuming this is going to be too much light for any coral, although in some tanks that are deeper, it could still be a useful setting. Visually, the tank looks very similar, although the PAR meter indicates otherwise. A maximum reading of 600 was recorded. 1/3 of the way down through the tank, we were getting readings of 500 or 550. Halfway down, closer to 400 or 410. 2/3 of the way down, about 230. And in the sand bed, nearly 215. These values are too high really for any coral. Unless your tank is very tall, there's not a lot of reason to set the AI blades at 100%. I did take the opportunity to do some readings on some strange places in the tank, including in the shade, underneath a few of my coral colonies, and underneath the shelf rock, and found some interesting results. For example, my rock flower anemone, living under a ledge, was receiving PAR of about 40. Along the back wall, I was finding figures of 150 to 180. Overall, I was very impressed with the light spread and the penetration of the light from 2 AI blades. Next, we dropped the lights down to 40% intensity on all 3 channels. It's becoming clear that lighting in my tank needs to be somewhere below the 70% we started with. This test will help us figure out exactly where. At 40%, there was a pretty dramatic reduction in PAR. A maximum value of 250 was what we encountered about 1/3 of the way down in the center. There was a noticeable drop off in power along the sides of the tank, where power values really only got to about 60 to 70. Similarly, the power that reached all the way to the sand bed dropped pretty dramatically all the way down to 100. These values are perfectly acceptable for an LPS tank, although for an SPS tank I'll need them a little bit higher, particularly farther down in the tank. So I'll need to play with my lighting and come up with a figure somewhere in between the 40 and 70%. I'm figuring it's probably somewhere around 55 to 60% maximum. Next, I wanted to see how actinic lighting differed from full spectrum lighting. I had been dialing up my blue and royal spectrum during the evenings and wondered if these were still generating the same amount of power. So for this, I moved royal and blue to 100 and white to 0. The interesting finding here is that PAR didn't drop very much. We still recorded a peak reading of 430 PAR at the center of the tank, about 1/3 of the way down. About halfway down, it dropped to 280, and then in the sand bed, only to 210. The takeaway here is that actinic lighting still generates a large amount of PAR. Your eyes and your brain might associate this blue color scheme with being a nighttime or an evening time setting, but for your corals, they're still experiencing a large amount of photosynthetic active radiation. As you set your tank's lighting schedule, it's important to recognize the amount of energy that you're delivering to the tank, even in this supposed nighttime setting. As I adjust my light schedule, my actinic lighting won't be increasing as the whites dissipate through the day. Here's what my light schedule used to look like. As white light decreased, my royal and blue were set to go up. In reality, these needed to stay constant, where they had been throughout the day, at about 65%. Now you can see that my schedule holds the blue and royal channels nearly constant throughout the day. This may help with my coral bleaching and overall color. The rest of this video will cover the same tests repeated using a single AI blade. If you have 2 AI blades, thank you for watching, and please consider subscribe to see more videos. This is the light configuration that I used for the single blade test. I moved one of the light fixtures to the center of the tank and moved the other to the rear chambers to hide all its light. We'll work down from most intense to least intense, with this first test being at 100% for all 3 channels. A single AI blade produced very high PAR readings higher up in the tank, although lower down in the tank and in more shaded areas, the tank clearly benefited from having 2 lights going. At full blast, it produces 480 PAR in the top third of the tank. This drops rather significantly when we get to the lower third of the tank, down to 130, and then all the way to 75 as we get near the sand bed. These numbers give you plenty to work with if you have a mixed reef tank. If you have a very high rockscape like I do, or mature corals, a second AI blade does help reduce shadowing and increase light spread throughout the tank. Our next test is using a single AI blade at 70% capacity on all 3 channels. Once again, we don't see a lot of visual difference, although the amount of PAR does go down. PAR went down by about 30%, which is understandable considering we have reduced power by 30%. The maximum reading we encountered was about 400 par in the top third of the tank. Like in our first test, the par does drop pretty substantially as we go down farther in the tank. In the bottom third, we found readings of about 120, and on the sand bed of about 70. These numbers are perfectly acceptable for an LPS tank and even for some high rock structure SPS. Next, we reduce power by an additional 30%, running all three channels at 40% of maximum. This reduction in power resulted in an equal reduction in par. We received a maximum par value of 320. This declined pretty substantially as we get lower in the tank, maybe even a bit more than expected, to about 65 in the bottom third and about 40 right on the sand. Most reef keepers will want to keep their par a bit higher low down in the tank, so settings somewhere between 40 and 70 are going to be appropriate for most mixed reef tanks. Our final test is a repeat of the actinic spectrum, so 100% blue and 100% royal with a single AI blade. The test with a single AI blade mimics the results of the double AI blade. We find a maximum par of about 370. This drops to about 110 in the bottom third and about 70 on the sand. Having two AI blades does appear to help light penetration as we get farther down in the tank. This concludes our testing of par readings with AI blades. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please consider a like and subscribe, and comment below your experience with using AI blades or different lighting systems. Be on the lookout for other aquarium videos on this channel, including using the par meter in our Biocube 32 stock lighting system, and species profiles for most of the corals you see here.